Hey there, I'm Sohla El-Waylly, and this is Ancient Recipes with Sohla. In each episode, we take a dish you may recognize and attempt to recreate one of the oldest versions of it to ever exist. So it's a little cooking, a little history, and a whole lot of me. What's not to love? I love me some pumpkin, so I am so excited that today we're gonna do a blown out pumpkin pie episode. We're gonna make 2 pumpkin pies from the 1600s to try to recreate what might have been at the first Thanksgiving. One has fried pumpkin and apples in it, and the other we're gonna puree the pumpkin into a paste. But neither has spices. How do you have pumpkin pie without spices? I don't know, I guess we're gonna find out. Okay. Since the Pilgrims brought a lot of their food traditions from Europe with them, we're looking to 2 mid-1600 recipes to get close to what they ate. One is the first ever pumpkin pie recipe from 1651 France, and the other comes to us from a 1670 English cookbook, and it's the first cookbook ever written by a woman. Even though this English recipe is a little bit older, it's probably closer to what the Pilgrims ate because they came from England. Things are gonna get a little spicy around here. Huh? Did I just say that? All right, I think I hit my dad joke quota for the day. A quick backstory on the pumpkin. When arriving at Plymouth Colony, the Pilgrims were not huge fans of pumpkin, like a lot of things from the New World. When they had to survive that first brutal winter, the Native Americans provided them with pumpkins and taught them how to cook the pumpkins, which made the settlers finally adopt the North American native food. Pumpkins were very quickly adopted by Europeans and integrated into their food too. It only took 30 years from settling at Plymouth Colony for the first recipe for tarte de pumpkin to show up in a French cookbook. So let's get started by making the crust for each of our pies. So we're gonna make the same crust for both. The recipes don't really tell you about a specific crust, but this is a crust that was very common back then. All right, so we're gonna start by whisking up a couple of eggs. Now, I think the thing that's been interesting, we made a couple of pies for apple pie, and they both had really different crusts than I'm used to. I usually make like the really simple flour, butter, water, sugar, salt kind of situation. And the crust we made then had egg whites in it, and it ended up being so crispy and light, I was really surprised. So I'm really interested to see how a crust with a whole egg does. I've never made a crust with a whole egg. And there's also some vinegar in there, which I don't know what that's gonna do. So we'll see. We're gonna add a little bit of vinegar. I do know vinegar prevents browning. I don't know if that's what you want from a crust. Maybe it is, I don't know. And some cold water. And this is gonna be our wet to help the crust hold together. Now, there are some people who question whether the Pilgrims even had pumpkin pie at the first Thanksgiving. They say that they might not even have ovens, but it's very likely that the first thing they made was ovens so that they could bake stuff, you know, like bread. Okay, so now our dry. We got our wet, now our dry. Flour, salt. There's no sugar in here. And I'm just gonna finger whisk this together, you know? And then we have a bunch of cubed up butter that I'm gonna just, I'm gonna use my fingers to like rub it in. You could use a pastry cutter or a fork, but I like to just use my fingers and work really quickly. You don't want the butter to melt, so you gotta move fast. If it's very warm or you don't feel confident that you can move quickly, then I'd recommend using like a couple of forks or a couple of butter knives, like held together side by side, and then you can cut the butter in there. I feel like the crusts back then were all like sturdier. Nowadays, we just use butter and just barely enough water to hold it together because you want everything to be like delicate. So the Pilgrims definitely owe a lot to the Wampanoag tribe, especially after the first couple brutal winters. The Wampanoag have been growing and harvesting pumpkins for a long time. They probably have a pie too, I bet. You can see the butter is like really broken down. We have some crumbly, like coarse cornmeal bits, and then we have some little corn flaky bits. I'm gonna go ahead and add the wet. So I'm gonna make a little well. Okay, and I'm gonna use a fork to incorporate it all. I'm just gonna pour the wet right in there, bloop. And we're gonna bring it all together with a fork. And then I'm just gonna give it a couple of like kneads to bring the dough together. I noticed that like a lot of these ancient pie crusts, you just bring it together. Because like modern pie crust, you kind of laminate it. You give it a few folds so it ends up with some flakes. But I've been surprised, these pie crusts, even without those extra folds, have been really nice and flaky. Now, I do sometimes read the comments, and I've noticed that You guys leave a lot of good ideas for ancient recipes. If you have any like recipes that have been passed down from generation to generation, let us know. Maybe it'll inspire a future ancient recipe, because that's really how food should work. Like, it should be a recipe that you learned from your mom, who learned it from your grandmother. I'm gonna actually dump this out to really bring it together, and then we're gonna divide this dough in two, and it's gonna be the crust for both of our pies. It's feeling pretty good. The egg yolks made the dough really nice and yellow. I became actually such a big fan of the egg white pie crust from the apple pie that the last few pies I've made this summer, I've put egg whites in it. Hey, that's really good for a first slice. You know what they say, the first slice is usually not good? That's why I like to keep the pieces of butter kind of big, because when we do these folds, it's gonna get worked in there a little bit further. This almost feels a little bit like a tart dough with the whole eggs. All right, that feels like it has come together. So I'm gonna bring it into like a rectangle so we can divide it in half and roll each half out for our pie plate. We don't have to be perfect. That's pretty good. All right, maybe a little bit more. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna work with one piece of dough at a time. Gather it into a nice ball, and I'm gonna roll it to about 1/4 inch thick, a little flour dusting, so our pie does not stick. I don't skimp on the flour when I'm rolling out a dough, because the last thing you want is to work so hard on a dough just to lose it to the board. This dough is rolling out really nicely. It definitely feels more like a tart dough. I don't think this is gonna be super flaky. I think it's gonna be more on like the tender side. I have a friend who wrote a cookbook about how to make the best pumpkin pie, and she said that you should never use the pumpkin stuff in the can, and then the pumpkin people came after her for speaking bad about their product. You gotta be careful. The pumpkin lobbyists, they're out there. Now, I remember when we made the apple pie, a lot of people asked how we chilled the crust if it was ancient times. But I imagine they had like a root cellar or something like that that's a little bit colder. Or maybe you just make pumpkin pie not in July. Okay, so we've got our pie plate. I've actually grown to really love these cast iron pie plates ever since the apple pie episode, and it's all I use now. I used to bake in glass. The crust comes out so much crunchier because cast iron retains heat really well. I've become a big cast iron pie plate girl. All right, we're gonna line our dough. Make sure you get into the edges. It's really easy to not get in there, and then it's gonna look a little sad when you slice it. Cool. Now I'm gonna trim off some of this edge. I wanna leave about 1.5 inches off the rim so we have a little bit to crimp. These little edges, don't ever throw these out. Don't ever throw these out. My favorite thing as a kid was when my mom would make something like this. She'd roll up these scraps with cinnamon sugar, like roll it out again, and you almost have like elephant ears. You know, those little puff pastry cookies that have like a swirl of sugar? Okay, we're all trimmed. Now we're gonna give it a little crimp. Just fold it over. Now this also makes the edge a little bit thicker, so it's gonna hold the crimp a little bit better. And then I'm gonna go stick it in our root cellar to chill. Or outside, you know, because it's October. Nestle it among the fallen leaves. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay, I'm gonna go for just a really simple crimp. This is my favorite crimp because it's easy. We just want a little bit of height, give our filling a place to go. And then I'm gonna move on to our next pie. So even though we've got the same crust for two pies, these pies are super, super different. And I'm really excited to see how they each taste. Funny thing, the Pilgrims only stopped at Plymouth because they ran out of beer. I understand that. I feel that. How can you keep going? And then they stopped and they started making pumpkin beer. So it's almost like our pumpkin pie obsession in the fall is like we're all just trying to channel our inner colonial American. Okay, all right, so now that both of my crusts are prepped, I'm gonna move on to make the filling for my French pumpkin pie from 1651. Okay, so I've got some cubed up pumpkin, and we're gonna cook it in milk until it's tender. And that's gonna be mushed into a puree. And that's it, really easy filling. So I'm just gonna add enough milk to almost cover it, and we're gonna let it cook really gently. I want it to get really nice and tender. While it cooks, I'm gonna get in there and smush it up. The point is to get a really nice, smooth puree. So In the 1600s, the Wampanoag tribe, the folks who introduced the Pilgrims to the pumpkins, they were a tribe of around 40,000 people spread across 67 villages. They lived in the areas that's now Nantucket, Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and other places throughout Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But between 1615 and 1619, the tribe was completely devastated by disease, likely because they didn't have immunity to the diseases brought over by the early explorers. All right, so I think that this pie is not going to taste a lot like the modern pumpkin pie because there's no cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, or clove. But you know how like now pumpkin pie is all about that spice? So pumpkin pie spice didn't actually become a thing until the 1950s when McCormick decided to package it all up. You know, for folks who thought it was too hard to measure out cinnamon, allspice, nutmeg, ginger, and clove. So my pumpkin has had some time to simmer in the milk, and it's really nice and tender. And the thing that's really cool is that the milk got really orangey. It's like this really bright color. I was worried about whether or not this pie would feel rich, but the milk got really nice and thick from the starches in the pumpkin. It almost has like an unglazed kind of vibe. Now I'm gonna strain it through this colander and I'm gonna push through the solids because we want it to be a nice smooth puree. They wouldn't have had a blender back then. So, you know, we gotta put some work into it. See how much of that pumpkin just broke down? Just in the milk? I wasn't expecting that. I thought I'd be smushing this through the colander forever. Now already, a lot of it has strained out just like on its own. And I'm just gonna use the back of the spoon to get out the big chunks and smush this out. Pumpkin pie as we know it today probably didn't come around until 1796 in Amelia Simmons's first American cookbook called American Cookery. And in there she had 2 recipes for something called pumpkin pie. And that's like closer to what we eat today. And now after I smush this, we're just adding some sugar, salt, and butter. And that's it. It's a really simple pie. It's gonna really be pumpkin forward. Nothing's there covering up that flavor. Colonial women must have had really good, like, strong arms. I doubt they had to go to Pilates or anything. They're just like in really good shape from all of this hard work just for making a pie. All right, so let me get this last bit of puree in here and then we're gonna mix it up and pour it into our crust. And then we're gonna bake this. I don't know how set this is gonna get because there's no binder in here. So we're just fully relying on the starch from the pumpkin to hopefully hold it all together. So in here, I'm gonna add some kosher salt. You always need salt with dessert. Makes everything taste better. A little bit of sugar. Oop. And some melted butter. That's it. Stir this up. It's going into a pie. Will it pie? I don't know. I feel like that's the theme of all the pies we've made. I'm just like, will it pie? I've never pied like this before. That came out really smooth, even without like a blender. I'm surprised because we took the time and like really slowly cooked it. Okay, going in. The color's pretty crazy, that this is all just pumpkin. They probably didn't have Pilates, but they might have had pie lattes. Huh? I thought we were done with the dad jokes, but I guess not. We never end with the dad jokes. It never stops. Okay, so my French pumpkin pie is all done, and now I'm gonna move on to making my English pumpkin pie. I'm gonna break down a pumpkin. It's gonna feel very festive in here. Almost like it's time to carve a jack-o'-lantern. So I'm gonna carve off the top and bottom, and we're gonna cut this pumpkin into really thin slices. This is a very different recipe. I've never had a pumpkin pie like this. I've never had a pumpkin pie where the slices are like layered. I feel like it's always just like puree. Usually that's stuff in a can. You have to check out some of the pictures of the ridiculously large pumpkins. They're insane. The largest pumpkin on record was grown by Matthias Willems from Belgium. And for some context, it's bigger than a bear, than a small car, than a giraffe. The one thing it's not bigger than, though, is the world's largest loaf of bread. Yeah, you could head down a deep rabbit hole looking up world record-breaking foods. Rabbit holes can be dangerous. Okay, so I'm gonna peel off the skin. It's really tough, so I might take a few layers to get it off. They might have done this all with a little knife, but I have to not hurt myself because we have more of these to shoot. I gotta get through this episode. So I'm gonna use a peeler, keep it safe. Nowadays, I would never try and like peel a pumpkin with a knife. It's just, it can get a little dicey. So for a little context, this recipe comes to us from Hannah Worley's The Queen Light Closet, which is the first ever cookbook written by a woman that we know by name. I think that the reason why most pumpkin pies nowadays are just puree is because it's so easy. You don't have to peel the pumpkin. You just split it in half and roast it. Peeling a pumpkin is kind of a pain. This peeler's really doing the job. If I was trying to do this with a paring knife, we'd be here all day. I might lose a thumb. Oh my God, did we do it? Yes, we did it. Success. Okay. Now, I'm going to cut this in half. It's a lot easier though. Once you've peeled a pumpkin, it's a lot easier to cut it because the peel is really the toughest part. So whenever I'm cutting something big like this, I go down one side and then the other. If you try and do it all at once, you could hurt yourself, so better to be safe. Now we're gonna scoop out the guts. Now you could totally save these seeds and roast them up. Historians have found the oldest domesticated pumpkin seeds on record in the Oaxaca highlands in Mexico that date back 7,500 years ago. It's said though that those pumpkins were much smaller and bitter. There's a lot of labor in this pumpkin pie. The carving, the scooping. Okay, my pumpkin has been cleaned out and I'm gonna start slicing it now. So a lot of knife work here. I'm gonna go crosswise because it feels like it's gonna be the easiest thing. It's set to go very thin. And then we're gonna try and dip it in egg and fry it until it's tender. So it's gonna be pretty much cooked before it goes into the pie. One thing I've noticed with these recipes is it'll say like 1 apple or 2 apples or 1 pumpkin, and then the amounts feel like really big, and I think it's because maybe the stuff we have now is bigger. Like I did a recipe for a corn cake, and when I made the corn cake, I used 6 cobs of corn because I used little corns from the market, but when people made it at home, they only needed 2 because they were using corn from the grocery store. The size of produce can like really vary, so it's a little tough when they just say 1 pumpkin. How much is that exactly? I don't know. Pumpkin sizes can really vary. It could be handheld. What if it's a tiny handheld pumpkin she's talking about? I actually think half is gonna be plenty, and I'll save this other half for another pumpkin, for another time, for another pie. You know what I'm trying to say? Every step of this pie is interesting. So now we're gonna dip it in an egg batter, and we're gonna fry it. So there is actually a recipe for a pumpkin cheesecake that predates the 1651 French one that we made earlier. And it was written by none other than Bartholomew Scapi.
Buongiorno.
You might remember that name because we made his gnocchi a few episodes ago.
Back to the grater it is.
But it's possible that that cheesecake used non-pumpkin squashes because a lot of the recipe translation weren't so clear back then. But yeah, Scapi. Scapi.
Grazie.
So I'm whisking up my eggs, and now we're gonna add some chopped up rosemary, thyme, and sage. These are herbs that the Pilgrims definitely would have had back then. So even though there's no spice, I think that the herbs are gonna bring a lot to the party. Okay, so here I'm heating up some neutral oil, and we're gonna dip the pumpkin in the egg and herb, and then fry it. So I'm gonna drop a little bit of egg in the oil to see if it's hot. Little drip drop. Wow. You know that the fryer is ready because the eggs are egg-sided.
Boo.
Now, we go in with the pumpkin. Let's see how this does. Slice. Dunk. Herbs. I see good herbage. And away we go. Hey, that stuck to it. I thought it would just like fall right off, but no, we're looking good. Good herb coverage. Another slice. I feel like the oil temperature is like spot on right now. I think this pie is gonna be weird. Like this is weird. Like it's a pie filled with fried egg and fried pumpkin. Interesting, interesting, Hannah. This pie is also a lot of work. I mean, pie is usually a lot of work, but this extra step of the frying I think is like something else. Hopefully we get some color. It looks like we are already. So, oh yeah, beautiful brown color, which I imagine was only gonna get more caramelized in the oven. Add lots of like nice, sweet, deep flavor. This looks like I want to get like some tartar sauce to dip alongside. This doesn't look like pie filling to me right now. Okay, some of these are ready to come out. I'm just gonna keep going like one at a time. Keep an eye on it. I'm pretty impressed by how crispy and evenly coated it is with the egg. There's a lot of things that I've learned from these ancient recipes, like there's a lot of culinary like rules that you learn, like you must do 3-step breading, that like, I don't know who came up with these rules, because now I'm saying like you don't need to follow them. You can make something new, you can break the rules. My mom always had a little skillet of oil like in the back of her stovetop so she could fry on demand, and I do the same thing. Like there's nothing like some casual Wednesday night French fries. Okay, so I've got my fried pumpkin slices, and I'm gonna toss this together with some sugar. Gotta have sugar. It's dessert. Whoops. And we're gonna add some currants and raisins. A lot of early pumpkin pie recipes had dried fruit added to it, like raisins, currants, and even apple. And instead of mashing or pureeing, it was very common to slice and layer the way we're doing with this pie. Now, a little bit of sherry. I love cooking with sherry. It adds like this, just like a delicate hit of that alcohol heat that I think we're not getting here because we don't have vanilla extract. So the sherry's gonna kind of hit us with that. So I'm gonna just toss this together. Oh, as soon as I added the sherry to the hot pumpkin, I can like really smell the pumpkin and those woody herbs. So this is just such an interesting pie. Woo, you know what's cool? The pumpkin is still warm. So the sugar and the sherry kind of like dissolved into a syrup, which I wasn't expecting. And it's like the pumpkin's now like absorbing it. Now, moving on to our apple. There's a lot of knife work in this one. So you really liked the people you were making this pie for. Or you're just trying to impress them. I don't know. Sometimes you want to impress people you hate, right? I don't know. Is that just me? Okay, so when I was a kid and I had like a bad day at school, I would stay up all night and bake. And I don't know why my parents allowed it. Like a 12-year-old up at 3 a.m. in your kitchen unsupervised with like all of the ovens and stoves on. But they did. They just let me do that. So yeah, I did a lot of hate baking. I think it's how I got through all of junior high and high school. All right, now we're gonna go for some thin slices. So we went for like a tart apple. It's gonna give us some contrast, you know, because the squash is sweet. We got sugar, we got currants, so a little bit of zing from our apple. Tart apples are also great because they hold together when you cook them. You know, something like Golden Delicious I think is really nice for eating, but I don't really like to bake with it because it just, unless you really want something saucy and smooth, it can be a little bit too mouchad, for lack of a better term. So, I have my crust, I got my apples, and I have my fried squash mixed up with all the currants, and now I'm just gonna start with a layer of apples at the bottom. I don't think I'm gonna be too precious about it. I'm just gonna cover it because it's gonna all cook down together. So I just wanna make sure it's in one layer, but like I'm not like making beautiful concentric rings or anything because no one's gonna see this. Now, the filling's going in. There's no binder once again. Like, same thing with our French pie. No binder, no egg. So I'm wondering how this is gonna come together, but we'll see. So I don't imagine that this is gonna cook down because the pumpkin's already cooked. Maybe it'll poof a little. I don't know. Okay, now this is gonna go into the oven and then we're gonna have our side-by-side tasting. French versus English. All right, so while this pie is hot, I'm gonna top it with a couple pats of butter, and it should just melt right in there. Add some extra richness. I usually top my pies with butter before baking, so I think this is a nice way to finish it so you get that like fresh butter taste. It's finally time to dig in. I'm really excited to see what the first Thanksgiving might have tasted like. I'm gonna start with the French pumpkin pie from 1651, the first written recipe. Okay, so the filling, I was a little worried about how it would set because there's no eggs. Nowadays, pumpkin pie It's a lot of eggs, a lot of cream, but it definitely set. If anything, it's like very set. I think because it was just straight up pumpkin. Let's see. Whoa. Whoa. Hey, that's a very good first slice. I've gotten really good at first slices. So the crust looks nice and crisp on the bottom. The filling looks set for sure. Maybe even a little bit starchy, but it definitely looks creamy. So I'm excited to dig in. I am missing the spices. I am, but without the spices, the flavor of the pumpkin itself really comes through. It's pretty much just like a pumpkin puree. I'm just getting pure pumpkin puree, and without the spices or the typical like eggs and cream, I'm getting a lot of the butteriness from the crust. It's very simple, but I feel like we're highlighting the two main core ingredients really well. Oh, it reminds me of a sweet potato pie because it's a lot starchier than a modern pumpkin pie. But I think if you like sweet potato pie, you'll really like this. It's like really all about the pumpkin. Flavor really comes through, and the texture is pretty good. It's like a little bit denser than I'm used to, but it's tasty. I'm into it. Maybe a little dollop of whipped cream. So this is Hannah Morley's pie from England, and this is more likely what they had, what the Pilgrims had at the first Thanksgiving, because they also hail from England, like Hannah. But like this one, the whole entire studio smells delicious. Even though there's no spice, it like really feels holiday, just from the aroma of the pumpkin and the currants and the browning. You get a lot of like caramel smell. The top really browned very nicely. Okay. Lift, lift. Hey, not bad. Ooh, I can really smell the sage and rosemary now that I've lifted it out. Okay, it's not the cleanest slice, but not bad. Really held together very well, considering that it's just like a bunch of stuff tossed together. And you can see that apple layer at the bottom. It looks very different from the really caramelized pumpkin top. All right, so I wanna make sure I get a little pumpkin, get a little currant, a little apple. This is interesting. I've never had a pie like this before. Hold on, I have to think about this for a second. You know when you fry something, you taste that cooked oil taste, which gives it like a really rich savoriness. And then you get the pops of currant, and then you get the apple. It's like really nicely balanced because we got kind of this savory pumpkin vibe. Even though pumpkin is sweet, the herbs kind of take it to another place. And then you have the sweet raisins and currants that kind of plumped up in that cherry. And the apples are really tender and really soft. And a lot of the sweetness is actually coming from the apple more than the fruit. It feels almost like a meal, you know? It doesn't feel like a dessert. It feels like an entree pie. I think it's really cool what I learned from these ancient recipes. They're so different, but there's also so much that I take away from it. I'm really happy to have tasted these things and get like a little bit of insight at what it might have been like, you know, back in the 1600s. Soft and chewy, crispy and crunchy, there's no denying how warm and comforting gingerbread men are around the holidays. And even if you butcher it and overbake them, at least they'll make cute gingerbread house decorations. Ginger cookies and crackers have been around a long time, like ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, and even before that. But the original gingerbread men come from Queen Elizabeth I. Yep, gingerbread men are a royal creation. As we were diving into Queen Elizabeth's gingerbread story, another iconic figure kept popping up, Abraham Lincoln. Turns out he was obsessed with these little treats too. So, in today's episode, we're gonna recreate Queen Elizabeth's gingerbread men using medieval cookie molds and recreate the stick figure looking gingerbread men that were Abe Lincoln's childhood fave. We gotta start with the OG, so a little background on the Queen and her gingerbread men. Queen Elizabeth I reigned from 1558 to 1603 and had gingerbread men created as part of her lavish royal banquets. At these dinners, she would pull out all the stops, even having things like marzipan shaped like fruit, castles, and birds. It's said she had the first gingerbread men made in the image of some of her favorite suitors and guests, as sort of a culinary entertainment. She also had some decked out in gold leaf and added to the place settings. So the recipe of gingerbread that we're trying to recreate today comes to us just after Queen Elizabeth I's reign, 1672, from Hannah Worley's The Queen Light Closet. That's where we got the pumpkin pie recipe from. This feels very familiar. We're just gonna do this for a very long time. We went for like a really dark whole grain bread because that's what they would have had back then. So after grating all this bread, we're gonna sift it and then, whoa, surprise, we're gonna cook it with some wine. I haven't made a gingerbread like this. I know you may wanna watch me grate bread for an hour, but I don't think I'm gonna have any arms left. So we grated some already. It's already been sifted, so we can move on to making the dough. This is a very unique gingerbread recipe for me, at least. So we're gonna pop all these breadcrumbs into this pot. If this is delicious, it's kind of a great use of leftover bread. I don't know about you, but I save like every little end in the freezer to make breadcrumbs later. And now, into here, we're gonna add some granulated sugar and a whole bunch of spices. She's the queen, so she could afford all the spices, right? So of course, ground ginger. Wouldn't be gingerbread without it. Now also, cinnamon, so far, that's feeling pretty classic. Here's where it gets a little interesting. We've got some anise and ground licorice. Two things that I haven't put in my gingerbread before, so I'm interested to see how this combo tastes. And we're gonna cook it all together with some white wine until it turns into a paste. And then we cool that paste and pop it into those medieval cookie molds. Boom, gingerbread. So back then in the recipe, it called for claret, which today for us means red wine from Bordeaux. But back then that meant clear wine. So we're going with a nice white wine here. So the recipe said to use 3 loaves of bread, grated into crumbs and then sifted. But I don't know exactly how big their bread was. So I'm gonna add a little bit of water as needed to get to like a paste consistency. Maybe they had smaller loaves of bread than us. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, the heat, from the heat I can already smell the spices. From all this wine, I don't think this is for children, right? I'm imagining we want it to be like a little bit looser than a cookie dough so that once it cools, it's like a cookie dough consistency. Like maybe a thick porridge. I don't know, I'm totally guessing. With these ancient recipes, it's like half educated guesses, half archaeological evidence. Whoa, this is getting weird. I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't think this was it. I mean, it smells like gingerbread, but it's really getting stuck to the pot. All right, a little more water. I want to make sure all that sugar gets dissolved. During the Elizabethan era, banquets were a separate course eaten in a banqueting hall. It was kind of like a royal dessert buffet. There were some savory items too, and lots of desserts full of cookies and sweetmeats. I think this mush is good to go. Everything's incorporated. It feels like a paste. And I'm gonna let this cool while we work on our Lincoln gingerbread cookie dough. I know what you're thinking. Lincoln and gingerbread men? I don't get it. But he became forever tied to them after telling a childhood story about gingerbread men to turn the tides at the Lincoln-Douglas debates during his Senate campaign in 1858. So we're gonna start by mixing up the wet. This gingerbread recipe feels more like a gingerbread, I know. So we're gonna start by mixing some milk with sorghum syrup. A lot of times people would have used molasses now and then, but sorghum was really popular in the Midwest and South where Lincoln is from. And also, molasses was a byproduct of slave production, so it makes sense that he didn't want to use that. But sorghum is delicious, and I think we should bring it back. Let's bring back sorghum, guys. I like it. It's like smoky and nutty. Should we taste some sorghum on its own? Yeah. It's really good for cooking. You know, roast some chicken, glaze it with sorghum. I just like it on a pancake. It's not molassesy, it's sorghum-y. I don't know. It reminds me of like Coca-Cola. So we're gonna stir that together just to like dissolve the sorghum. These gingerbread men are gonna be kind of a unique shape. Rather than molding them or cutting them out, we're gonna make little stick figures. Have you seen the Blair Witch Project? And you know how there's like stick people hanging in the woods? That's kind of what it looks like. It looks like something you'd curse someone with. But I guess that was cute back then. Okay, we are dissolved. Now we shall move on to the dry portion. Look at that. That already looks good. Okay, bowl, flour, activate finger whisk. Boom. We've got flour in here, and we're gonna add something called saleratus, which was a precursor to baking soda. And, you know, this is a humble gingerbread, only one spice, ginger. Keeping it with the, sticking with the essentials. And just a touch of brown sugar. I think that's gonna make it sweet and also crisp. Finger whisking time. Let's get all that dry combined. No salt, huh? No salt in that one either. They didn't know back then. You gotta season your desserts, just like savory food. Cool, now we're gonna add some butter and rub it in, just like when you're making a pie crust, until it's like sandy and, the texture of cornmeal. We wanna rub that butter through. When people immigrated from Europe to America, they brought their gingerbread recipes with them, and then it kind of adapted to the ingredients they had here. So they replaced cane sugar with molasses, and then you got like a softer, chewier cookie. Okay, that looks good to me. Now I'm gonna make a little well, and we're gonna add our milk sorghum situation and stir that in. Cool. Okay, so I want to get into here and like mix this together a little bit better. So I'm gonna get in here with my hands. And I think that rolling these into like thin, spindly men is gonna be a good idea so they get really nice and crisp, because I have a feeling this is gonna be dense. I mean, it's an ancient recipe. They're usually dense. Okay, it is dough. It is a stiff and dry cookie dough. Now, making gingerbread houses actually gained in popularity in the 1800s, right after the Brothers Grimm released Hansel and Gretel. So, the actual story Lincoln told at the debate became a crowd favorite and was picked up by the papers as well. He became so well connected with the story that he would repeat it to visitors to the White House. Here's the story verbatim. When we lived in Indiana, once in a while my mother used to get some sorghum and ginger and make some gingerbread. It wasn't often, and it was our biggest treat. One day I smelled the gingerbread and came into the house to get my share while it was still hot. My mother had baked me 3 gingerbread men. I took them out under a hickory tree to eat them. There was a family near us poorer than we were, and their boy came along as I sat down. "Abe," he said, "give me a man." I gave him one. He crammed it into his mouth in 2 bits and looked at me while I was biting the legs off my first one. "Abe, give me that other end." I wanted it myself, but I gave it to him, and as it followed the first, I said to him, "You seem to like gingerbread." "Abe," he said, "I don't suppose anybody on earth likes gingerbread better than I do and gets less than I do." Yeah, well, I just keep this around. You never know with this show when you might need it. So I'm gonna start forming these gingerbread men by rolling a piece of dough into a size just larger than a golf ball. Is this a golf ball? We should have brought a golf ball for scale. Did they have golf balls back then? The recipe said golf ball. Okay, I'm gonna go gentle. I think this is gonna take some time to get into a 12-inch log. So, the campaign between Lincoln and Douglas was really heated. But in this debate, Douglas started with a bunch of compliments to win over the crowd before switching to personal attacks and accusations of Lincoln. And then Lincoln told this gingerbread story to try and win over the crowd, relate himself to the Hoosier boy by saying, nobody loved compliments from Douglas more than Lincoln, and he hardly ever got any. We want to go for about 12 inches. And we're going to break off 4 inches for the arms, and then fold over the rest into a little loop to be the head and legs. Cool, cute. Okay. All right, so we have this long cookie dough noodle. I'm going to rip off a few inches, and those are going to be the arms. Now this bit, we're going to make a little loop and pinch it together. Boom. Head and feet. Let's add our arms. And there we go. That's our little creepy gingerbread man. Hey, should we like pose them in different ways? Let's do that. There's one. Hello. This one's saying hello. Little dance. And we just keep going. Arms. It's a lot like Play-Doh. You're just rolling them out. Body. All right, so now I'm gonna put these little guys in the oven and we're gonna form Elizabeth I gingerbread. So while our Lincoln gingerbread stick figures bake, we're gonna return to Queen Elizabeth's. This dough has cooled and we're gonna mold it. So back then they didn't have cookie cutters and instead they would have used these intricate carved wooden molds. So we're gonna give this a shot. This is me with the angel wings and I think this is Gif with the hat and the Christmas tree. Or maybe it's Santa, I don't know. You know, it could be whatever we want it to be. I'm not sure if these are gonna pop out, so just for safety, I'm gonna brush it with oil and dust it with flour. That feels right. Gonna get into every little nook and cranny, and I wanna do like a really light coat. If you overdo it with the oil, you'll just end up with clumps of flour. Everything about this one versus Abraham Lincoln's, like you can tell the class, not only in the dough and the ingredients, but even how it's molded. Like you gotta have money to have a mold like this. It's expensive now, so I imagine it was very expensive back then. You know what I'm saying? Flour. Tipping it in. I think it's really fun to find out what these iconic figures were into eating. So if there's any like other iconic historical figure. Okay, I'm doing this just like flouring a cake pan. Little sprinkle, and we're gonna tap and make sure we get out all that excess. Let me move this oil, because I'm gonna tap aggressively. Whoa, whoa. So you want a really light coat, just a fine dusting. So you gotta tap aggressively. This is how you would butter and flour a bundt pan, huh? All right, let's get in here. Oh, okay, so now that it's cold, it's gotten really sticky and it feels more like dough. Whoa, and we'll pack it in, try and level it off, and smack it out. That's the goal. I don't know what's gonna be the reality here. So this is my first time molding cookie dough like this, but I'm gonna try and like make sure I kind of press firmly, get into those nooks and crannies. I imagine that's gonna matter. Let's see. Smush it in there, smush it off. We'll deal with one at a time. I'm using the back of a knife, but you know, if you're a child, go for something dull. I'm a professional, you know? If I cut myself, I can continue. Oh no, oh gosh, this is sticky. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna try again. All right, we decided to try a different utensil, floured bench scraper, and this seems to be working better. So these banquets that Queen Elizabeth I would have were bonkers. They would have sugar plates, sugar castles, sugar statues, so you can eat your dessert and then eat your plate, just like Willy Wonka. Okay, I think that's pretty good. We got our edges clean. Let's see how this flips, yeah? Let me put it here so you can see. How's that? I'm gonna go like one aggressive slap. Didn't work. Damn it. Ooh, okay. We did it. Okay, all right. I see, there's some details here. I can see she's carrying a basket. Whoa. All right, let's try this man. Dough going in. Let's try oiling up our hands again. That seemed to help with the spreading. Yeah. Press it in. This is a large cookie. Like this is your whole entree. Like you just eat this cookie and then you're good to go, right? This can't be for one, right? Could it be for one? I don't know. Okay, smush. Let's cut it off. All right. Things are going much smoother. Cool. Cool, cool. Okay. And then one more aggressive slap to get this guy out. And we're gonna bake these. I'm gonna see if I can transfer it. Oh, that was good. Okay, so you really must be aggressive with these cookies. And it's pretty sturdy. Ooh, okay, all right, huh. We're going into the oven, and then we're gonna taste both of our gingerbread people. Okay, our gingerbread is out of the oven. It's cooled a little bit, and it's finally time to taste. First of all, I love how they both held their shape. We still have all the detail on these Queen Elizabeth gingerbread people, and my little happy stick figure men are exactly the way we left them. They plumped a little bit, like spread just a tiny bit, but that dough was so weird and oily, I had no idea what would happen, so that's pretty cool. Smells great. I guess I'm gonna start with the original, Queen Elizabeth's. Smells good. It's still like a little bit soft. I feel like this is gonna be more of like those tender gingerbreads. It actually just like feels a bit like bread, which makes sense because that's how it started out. It was very dense. I think this is more decorative than delicious. Really spicy. A lot of spices coming through. I taste every single one. There's so much cinnamon, it actually is hot. Same thing with the ginger. And the licorice, you know, licorice kind of does this cool thing where it kind of coats your palate a little bit. So I'm getting everything very distinctly. It is like powerful on the spices. The texture, it just tastes like one of those really dense breads, which makes sense because we took bread and made it denser, just packed it in there. So texture-wise, you know, but the flavor is really cool, really, really intense, and I feel like this is something that'd be good to have like after you've had a really large banquet of food because all the spices can kind of help you digest a bit. But yeah, cool. All right, let's try these guys. Here we go, let's break off a leg. She's a dancer, so I think that would be the best thing. Yes. Nice and crisp. Very like breadstick-like, not just in the texture, but in the smell. It got really nice and toasty. Really mellow on the spice. Ginger in the back, but it doesn't hit you in the throat the way Queen Elizabeth's does. And instead, this is more about the sorghum. That's the flavor that comes through. This is nice and crisp, very mildly sweet. I think this would be one of those things you want to like dunk in coffee. It feels like a biscuit that I want with like tea. It needs a little dip for moisture. But both are pretty different from gingerbread I have today. I think the biggest difference is that they're not very sweet. I think that the modern gingerbread is like, it has like a snappy, crisp texture from the sweetness and like a soft chew also. So I think that's because it's less sugar. What kind of gingerbread do you like? I am all about crisp. I love the thin, snappy ones. I don't even want icing on it. We're gonna go on a little bit of a journey through the history of the tamale. First, we're gonna make an ancient Mayan version using iguana meat. Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna sing and eat iguana meat today. And then we're gonna make a colonial-era Aztec tamale from after the conquest by Cortez in the 1520s, showing what Spanish ingredients they would have adopted. Tamales are a staple of Latin American cuisine around the holidays, and making them is truly a party. The whole family gathers around, assembly line style, you know, stuffing, hand wrapping, and steaming the tamales. Along with the tradition, they have a long history dating back before the Mayan and Aztec civilizations, even before the Olmec civilization, which dates back to 1000 BCE. In fact, they were such a big part of Mayan culture, they even had an ancient hieroglyph for tamales. And to make things even more exciting, we have a special guest. If you've ever been to San Antonio or the Rio Grande Valley and had a tamale craving, then you've probably heard of Delia and her famous tamales. So for people who don't know, can you let us know a little bit about how your chain of restaurants began?
26 años para ser exacta. mi hermana me dijo a mí que si podíamos, sí, ¿por qué no hacemos tamales? Yo estaba viviendo en un lugar que no era mío, entonces pagábamos renta y todas esas cosas. Y le dije, pues vamos a empezar. Y como a mí no me gustaba la vida que llevaban mis hijas, yo decidí cambiar de modo de trabajar, porque yo no trabajaba. Trabajaba limpiando casas o donde me ocupaban. Entonces decidimos hacer tamales, compramos 5 libras de masa, las fuimos a vender ahí en la ciudad de Hidalgo y luego nos repartimos, dejamos dinero para comprar para el siguiente día y nos repartimos y en ese entonces nos tocaron $2.50 cada una fue la ganancia. Y de ahí fue como empezamos a hacer tamales. Y luego mi hermana se separó de mí y me quedé yo sola. Y duré como 2, 3 semanas sin hacer nada y luego yo pensé, yo puedo sola. Y fue cuando empecé yo sola con una amiga que vivía, era mi vecina, y ella me empezó a ayudar y yo empecé de poco a poco con 10 libras de masa y luego 5, 10 y me salí a venderlas yo sola. Pero gracias a Dios me tocaron muy buenos clientes que hasta ahorita me siento muy orgullosa de ellos. Algunas son mucho mayor que yo y todavía están conmigo y eso para mí es un orgullo. Y así fue como yo empecé. Y pues aquí estamos hasta la fecha, bendecidas grandemente. Ahorita tengo muchos asociados que son los que me hacen posible que todo, que Delias, tengo a mis hijas que trabajan ahí, pero los muchachos trabajan en mi negocio como si fuera de ellos. Y eso es una gran bendición que tenemos.
What do you think people are drawn to about your tamales? Like, what's the magic?
La magia que nosotros tenemos es que desde que yo comencé a hacer tamales yo sola, yo traté de buscar la mejor calidad de los productos que yo podía comprar. Y ahorita hasta la fecha tratamos de usar lo mejor que podemos y yo creo que eso es parte del éxito. Y la receta nunca la hemos cambiado, seguimos con la misma. Entonces, y con el mismo proceso de comprar, como le digo, lo que creemos que es lo mejor. Y lo hacemos con mucho amor. Tengo mis muchachos que son hermosos y nunca están al pendiente de todo lo que pasa, cuidan el negocio como si fuera de ellos y eso no se paga.
Well, I mean, it's very obvious that you're really passionate about what you do. And I think that you can always taste that in the food. Like, you can taste it when something's made with love, so that makes a lot of sense. So before I get into making tamales, do you have any like tips or tricks for me to think about as I get into this process?
Pues primero le puedo decir que tiene que buscar una masa que sea fresca. Entonces, cuando la masa es fresca, usted va a tener un mejor sabor. Entonces, de ahí, y bueno, aparte tiene que embarrarla con la mano, con la cuchara, y luego ya usted guisa su carne a su gusto. Y ya de ahí, pues ya nomás los hace y los embarra y los llena despacito y le van a quedar súper bien. Bueno, pero tiene que echarle todos los condimentos, el chile de color, el ajito natural, y son muchas cosas.
Okay, so we're definitely gonna get some high quality fresh masa. I will stay away from that instant stuff. That seems to be key. But before we let you go, I just have another question for you. So here we like to take an ancient recipe or a modern recipe and trace it back to its origins. So is there one recipe or dish that you'd like to see us trace back to the origins and like really find out where it came from?
I like the pho soup.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, I love pho too, and I haven't really made it a lot. I think it'll be really interesting to see how all those ingredients came together. That's such a great idea. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to get in there and start making some tamales. So thanks so much for your advice and letting us know about your story. And yeah, I'm really happy to have met you.
Well, thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias por pensar en mí. Yo les agradezco mucho que me den esta oportunidad.
I love how passionate she is about tamales. Her story is so inspirational. And the thing that I think that I took away from that chat that was key to me is that we need to start with high quality masa. We reached out to a local wholesale tortilleria, La Milpa de Rosa, and they were kind enough to send us the corn in different stages. So making masa, it sounds really simple, but there's kind of a lot going on. You start with this dry corn, and then this corn gets soaked in an alkaline solution. It's like boiled, and then it sits there for a while, and it becomes this. And then that gets rinsed and ground and you have with masa. To nixtamalize the corn, you soak it in something called calcium hydroxide, which sounds really fancy and scary, but it's actually just pickling lime. You can buy it from the grocery store. And then what it does to the corn is it makes it more nutritious, it makes it easier to grind, and it also makes the dough hold together a little bit better. So the way they would have done this way back then is you would grind this totally by hand in a molcajete. It takes forever. You just keep grinding and grinding and grinding, eventually you end up here. Today they have these really big stone grinders. You can even buy like a tabletop one called a wet grinder that does that for you. But I think it's crazy that they used to do that totally by hand and get it super smooth and pliable and this amazing dough. You cannot do this in a food processor. It's just not the same. It's gotta be that stone on stone action. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk about nixtamalizing corn. One of the keys to making tamales is you gotta whip your lard. Modern tamales have quite a bit of fat, and you whip that lard until it's really nice and fluffy, a lot like when you're making a cookie dough. And then you add your masa to that and your water, and you create this really nice emulsion that gives you like a fluffy and tender tamale. But there is consensus that the Mayans and Aztecs used very little fat in their cooking. So we're just gonna whip some salt and water into this. I think we're probably gonna have a denser tamale, but that's what it was like back then. Everyone ate food that was really dense. I'm just gonna do this by hand and I'm gonna add a tablespoon at a time. So I'm looking for a smooth and spreadable texture so we can easily fillet our husks. So tamales are actually considered one of the world's first portable foods. They were used by hunters and warriors because they were portable and they can take it with them on long journeys. Okay, this feels good. So it's like really nice and spreadable now. And it's gonna be easy for us to wrap it around a filling. So masa does dry out very, very quickly. So I'm gonna scrape the sides of the bowl, get it all to the middle, and then we're gonna cover this and set it aside while we make our filling. Okay, so we're gonna start by making our ancient Mayan filling. So back then, the Mayans and Aztecs didn't actually have pigs or cows, but they did have peccaries, which are similar to a pig. Domesticated pigs and cows didn't come to them until the Spanish conquest. So they would have used things like turkey, wild game, frogs, salamanders, beans, guava, honey. But we really wanted to have some fun here. So we're gonna make our filling with iguana meat. Whoa, I've never had iguana meat. So we're gonna find out together what this tastes like. But to start, I'm gonna make a little simple chili sauce. We don't have an exact recipe, so we're gonna just, use ingredients that we know they would have had, and hopefully we get close. So these are some guajillo chilies, and what I'm doing is cutting off the stem and removing the seeds, and then we're gonna toast them and soak them before pounding them up in our molcajete to make a little chili puree. And we're gonna cook our iguana in that. Guajillos aren't actually that spicy. They're more fruity and very flavorful, and almost has like a dried fruit raisin kind of vibe. I really like them. They go great with a lot of different things. And the other chilies we're using here are dried chipotles. Everybody knows what a chipotle is, or at least they've had a burrito from a place called Chipotle. So we're gonna use 2 chipotles and 4 guajillos. This should have like a really nice balance of spicy, fruity. I'm gonna give them a toast in our comal, and this just helps waken up the flavors. You don't wanna toast them for too long, but you will see that the color changes very slightly. It's gonna get a little bit dark, but the main thing is it's about the aroma. You're gonna smell it. You will definitely smell it. Your neighbors will smell it. Toasting chilies gets all up in there. And we're not gonna go for too long. Just gonna get a little bit of color, and then we're gonna let this soak. It's best to soak it overnight. So we already soaked some chilies, but if all you've got is a couple hours, that's cool too. Okay, see how quickly that just got a little bit blackened? And it got a little bit toasty. That's exactly what we want. It just brings those flavors forward. Okay, so you can see it's getting really nice and smoky. We have very good ventilation here, so it's not a big deal. So the chili smoke really gets to you. It's gonna be worth it. One awesome way that the Aztecs would use chilies is they would actually make these little chili bombs that they would throw at their enemies, almost like an ancient version of pepper spray. I can see how that would work very well. Okay, so now we're gonna char some onions and tomatillos. Tomatillos are native to Central and South America. They look a lot like a tomato with a peel. And when you peel it off, it's a little bit sticky underneath. Don't worry, that's just how it is. And when you char it, that stickiness goes away. They're super, super tart and a little bit bitter. So they're best like cooked or blended with something else. Now we want to get a little bit blackening here, and it's just going to give us some nice flavor. So tamales have been made for thousands and thousands of years for different festivals and rituals. And the cool thing is they haven't really changed that much. A tamale's always been a tamale. And I don't know why you would change it because they're perfect. Genuinely one of my favorite foods. So you might recognize this comal. We used it before in the Aztec taco episode, and it was my first time using a terracotta comal like this. I'm pretty happy with the char I got on my veggies. My peppers, onions, they're looking good to me. And a bunch of you told us in the comments that the reason why the comal burned was because we didn't season it. So thank you, we're learning from you. And we did try and season this one, and it looks like it's not sticking. It worked. You guys were right. We seasoned it. So I know all this blackening can look a little bit scary, but the char doesn't make it bitter or taste burnt. It's just gonna add a lot of depth and like savoriness. When you char things that want to be charred the right way, it actually adds really nice flavor. And then this is just like the first step of the cook. Once we blend it, this mixture is gonna simmer down with our iguana meat, and the flavor is just gonna get more deep and complex. There's still a lot of like chili residue. I'm feeling it in my throat. Every time we make mole or any kind of chili sauce at home, all of the neighbors know. This smell goes through the whole building. I can hear them coughing on the floor above us. Okay, the onions smell really good. Really good. I think we're in a good place. I'm gonna quit my charring, and now I guess we're gonna begin with a little bit of smashing. Okay, so we actually had to take 5 because I accidentally smoked out everybody. So we aired out the studio, and now we're back, and now we're gonna smash. There's a lot of smashing. Like, back then they would have smashed the masa, and then you return to more smashing of your chilies. Hey, that actually, it's smashing a lot more easily than I thought. I've only ever done this in a blender. So I've got a little smasher here, but you can look online at the huge manos and metates that they use to grind the corn and the chilies, and it's really incredible. You just like sit on the floor and you're just like grinding away. Just from smashing a little bit, I can really smell the chilies. Like, it's so fruity and it's so fresh, and it's almost become the texture of a fresh chili from that short soak. So let me get in here with some of these guys. Whoa, look at them smush. Wow. This is one of the easier things I've smushed, gotta say. I thought that I would need a GIF assist, but now I'm like, can I do this on my own? Okay, no. We're gonna bring in GIF. It's not the same, but you know what? We got a lot of things to do. It's gonna be good. Okay, so I'm gonna blitz this up in the blender with just enough water to bring it together. And this is gonna be the sauce that we cook our iguana meat in. Oh, this is very heavy. I'm gonna make sure I get all of this in here. But take a look, it already looks like that chipotle paste you buy in the can, just from a little bit of smashing. Now, a little splash of water, just enough to bring it together, and we are gonna have our iguana sauce. I'm so much closer to tasting iguana. Yay. I genuinely think that if the Mayans had Vita Preps, they would be using them. So, here's my chili puree. We went with guajillos because I feel like they're in almost every tamale. They're such a good chili, and chilies were actually held in such high regard that the Mayans and Aztecs would abstain from eating them during religious fasting periods. Now I'm gonna add some epazote. I feel like epazote makes things taste really accurate. Like, when you're cooking food from this region, epazote is key. It's a little bit like an oregano, but I feel like it's even earthier. And now it's finally time for our iguana meat. This is actually iguana meat. I know it looks like chicken, but we found it. We found iguana meat. You can tell that it looks almost like a bunch of chicken tenders. Like the muscle fibers look very different from chicken, but it does look very lean. They did have the option of purchasing a whole iguana with the skin on, but I didn't think that I would be able to figure out how to peel that and break it down. I imagine they have a lot of little small bones. Like I feel like it's kind of like rabbit. Actually, that's exactly what the meat looks like. It's a lot like a rabbit. So we're gonna cook this until the meat's tender enough that I can shred it with a couple of forks. I'm not actually sure how long that's gonna take, so we're just gonna keep an eye on it. I think if it's anything like chicken, probably around 40 minutes. Big pinch of salt, we gotta season it up. I'm gonna start with this much and then we'll taste it when it's almost done and maybe add some more. You wanna make sure you start with some salt though, because then the flesh will never really get seasoned all the way through. So I know tamales are a dish that's really tied to tradition and personal taste. So let me know, what are some of your favorite tamale fillings, especially special occasion ones around the holidays? What I think is great about tamales is you can put anything in there. Like I've even had a tamale with chocolate inside and it was delicious. So what's the coolest tamale filling you've made? Okay, I've got a little gentle simmer. We're gonna let it go. I'm gonna keep an eye on it. I'm not sure how long it's gonna take, and then we will come back and shred. Now we're moving on to the Aztec filling. Once again, they didn't have cookbooks, so we're pulling inspiration from this recipe from the Florentine Codex. In it, Fray Bernardino de Sahagún wrote about how he saw the Aztecs make tamales with fruit and chilies, dog and wild turkey. We decided to go with guavas. Guava is native to that area, so I think it's gonna make a delicious filling. And we're gonna add a little bit of chipotle for some heat. So I'm just gonna cook these guavas down in a bit of water. They're very ripe, so I'm gonna put them in whole, and I think they're gonna just be really easy to break up with a spoon. Let me add a splash of water in there, and we're gonna get it gently simmering. They do have really hard seeds that you can't eat. So once we cook this down into a paste, we're gonna pass it through a colander, and that's gonna catch our chili and coriander seeds and cinnamon. So we don't really have to worry too much about smashing it fine at this point. So chipotles, I'm gonna put them in whole. It's just gonna add a nice aroma. And we're gonna also add coriander and cinnamon. So in the 1500s, the Aztecs would have had coriander and cinnamon. It was one of the first things the Spanish conquistadors brought along with them, and it was also one of the first things they incorporated into their diet. Okay, so you see, as soon as I smash, see those little seeds? They are edible, but they're a little bit tough. I prefer eating them when you have like a slightly crunchy, unripe guava. My parents actually have like, I don't know, at this point probably 6 guava trees. When I was a kid, we started out with 1, but they just kept getting guava trees. I think it's my mom's like favorite fruit. And these sweet ones, we would always eat out of hand, just like, you know, like an apple or whatever. Nowadays, guava and cheese is a really common combo, but they wouldn't have cheese back then, so we're skipping it. But I do think I'm honestly gonna miss it. Guava and cheese is such a good combo. You can see how quickly it just breaks down and it gets really creamy looking. And you can't smell this, but this smells really good. Guava has a really nice, like, it's like a banana papaya had a baby kind of aroma. It's really nice. Right now it almost looks like cooked down banana. A lot of tropical fruits have like that similar kind of vibe. Okay, I think that this is a good texture. So like I said, there's a lot of pectin, so as soon as this cools, it's gonna thicken up really nice, and it's gonna be like the perfect consistency to put in our tamale. So I'm gonna turn this off right now. I'm gonna pass it so we can get rid of those seeds and spices. The main thing I smell is guava, but you have like the background notes from the cinnamon and the chili that I think are gonna be really nice. Okay, we press, we smush. There's so much smushing and smashing. That is the theme of every single episode. Let's make Sohla smash. So I'm gonna pass this mixture until I get out all of those seeds, and then we're gonna let this cool, and I think the iguana meat's probably ready to shred, and then we're gonna make our tamales. So the Aztecs made these festival tamales for the Lord of Fire, and they would wrap them in amaranth leaves, stuff them with greens, and serve it with a shrimp sauce. That sounds really good, and I think I need to go home and find amaranth leaves. Why didn't we make that one? That sounds delicious. It's crazy how some of these ancient combos, they still hold up. They must have really liked that Lord of Fire. The iguana meat is cooked and tender. It actually cooked a lot faster than I thought. Take a look at how it looks after cooking. Ooh, those fibers kind of stick out in a very different way than I've seen. I think I actually maybe even overcooked it. Didn't take that much time at all, but it feels a little bit tough and a little bit dry. I think it's very much like rabbit. Rabbit, if you've ever cooked it, you gotta be really careful with it. It can go from totally awesome to dry very quickly. Okay, so I'm gonna let my iguana meat cool, and we're gonna make our Aztec tamales first. Here's the cooled guava paste. You can see it thickened up quite a bit, and it's gonna be a nice filling for our tamales. Okay, so nowadays, the tamales that you see are usually shaped kind of like this, like an oblong rectangle kind of situation. But they found hieroglyphics in San Bartolo, Guatemala, dating back to 200 BC, showing that they used to form tamales into balls. So we're gonna try both shapes. And it'll help us, keep track of them in the steamer. So I'm gonna make our Aztec ones in the cylindrical shape that you can find. I guess it's a cylinder. The tamale shape you know and love. That's what we're gonna do with these tamales, and we're gonna make our Mayan filling into balls. So let's start forming. This is the best part. So we kept our masa covered so it didn't dry out. Look at that, it's still perfect and fresh and moist. And now we begin the formation. Okay, so I've seen a lot of people do this in different ways. My friend Rick Martinez, he likes to use like a spackle palette knife, something that you use for paint. It's not like a kitchen tool. He uses that to spread it on. But there's a bunch of different ways, and I think as long as you get there, that's great. So let's start with a little bit of filling. I'm not like a tamale expert. I love them and I make them when I have time, but I'm no Delia for sure. And then we're gonna add some of our guava filling right in the middle, a little dollop. A little bit goes a long way. And now we're gonna use the husk to kind of help us wrap it around. I think I can put more filling in there. I feel like the best tamales are when they get that ratio of filling to tamale mixture just right. And I think that's one of those things that just comes from practice. Okay. This is a little difficult without the lard, but we're doing our best here. So I'm gonna try and cover that up. Let's bring this bottom bit over. Okay, we're gonna try this. I think we're gonna be okay. Now you can also take your husk and rip it to make a little husk twine to tie this closed. You don't always have to do this, but I think I'm definitely gonna do it with these because the masa is a little bit different than what I'm used to. I think we need the extra help. Okay, and then you proceed. Fold it over. Okay, so we're back to our iguana meat. It's had some time to cool, it's nicely shredded, and now we're going to make our Mayan tamales. So I'm gonna try and go for the circle shape. I've never made a circle shaped tamale, but my instinct tells me that this won't work, right? So I'm gonna split it in half and go for this kind of situation. I don't know. We'll figure this out together. Now the tamales back then were a lot smaller. They even called it out in the Florentine Codex, how teeny tiny their tamales were. So we're keeping it tight too. I think that keeping it small is also gonna make it easier to make a ball shape. Okay, my thought is I go for spread it out into a circle, and then when I bundle the husk together, it will ball for me. Let's go for a little bit of this iguana meat. I've got my thread ready. Okay. I feel once again very much like I am making a dumpling. Everything's squidging out. No, I need a bigger circle. Well, I'm gonna tie this up because I don't wanna waste it. But I think for round 2, bigger circle. First attempt. I see why we've moved on to the cylindrical shape. This seems like it would be a lot harder to make, and you must keep them small, and nowadays we're all about everything's huge. Okay, let's try again. I'm gonna go for one piece. I'm gonna spread this out. Let's go for the hands again. This masa seems to respond well to wet hands, better than the spoon. Okay, so far so good. I'm gonna have this at the ready. I'm kind of thinking of it like, have you made a steam bun? And when you wrap the dough around, I think we're getting closer to something. How small were they? Were they like little munchkins? Like, you know those donut holes you get, but tamale version? It's finally time to cook our tamales. There is some debate as to how they might have cooked the tamales, whether they steamed them, baked them, grilled them. We're gonna steam, and one of the ways that they would have steamed is by creating a steaming basket by filling a pot with rocks, which I think is really cool. So we got these fancy rocks brought all the way from, are they from Mexico? I think they're actually from Mexico. That was an accident, that wasn't on purpose. But we're gonna fill the bottom of the pot with rocks, and that's gonna elevate the tamales so they don't sit in the water. We just want the steam. So now that we've got our bed of rocks, I'm gonna line the rocks with some of these husks to prevent the tamales from sticking. Although the Aztecs did believe that if you had a tamale that stuck to the bottom of the pot, that it was actually good luck and it would help you on the battlefield. But I just wanna eat them, you know? I'm not preparing for battle. I want to be able to eat every single one of these. So I'm gonna go for this little stickage protection. I'm gonna start with the round, my circle tamales, as circle as I was able to get them, right in the middle, and then I wanna try and kind of have the longer tamales stacked up against it so they're not like totally flat. I'm not totally sure how long it's gonna take because I haven't made tamales without lard, but we're gonna know it's done when the filling feels a little bit, when the masa feels a little bit set and firm. I'm gonna check on it after like half an hour. I think it's gonna be like half an hour to 45 minutes. These are quite small, so maybe it'll be faster than that. All right, I'm gonna cover these up and we're gonna fire it up, let them steam, and then we're gonna come back and it's gonna be time to taste our little tamale throwdown. It's time to dig in. So I was really worried. I've never made a tamale without any lard, so I had no idea how long these were gonna take to cook, but I guess because they're so teeny tiny, it only took 20 minutes to steam, and I guess I'm gonna dig in. I wanna start, you know, in chronological order, so I wanna start with the ancient Mayan ones, these little round guys. Little parcel, it's like opening a present. It smells really, really good, like really, just like that masa was so good that like the aroma from here is incredible. Now, I am also like a little worried, like, is this gonna stick without the lard? Will we have a beautiful little bundle? Okay, my formation wasn't top notch here. As you can see, it did just kind of fall apart and it is like sticking a bit to the husk. I think without the lard, it's kind of hard to get that clean release. Or maybe I'm just like not a pro at this yet, you know? But we're gonna taste. The chilies smell really, really good. So this has like those traditional native ingredients, the epazote, the guajillo, the chipotle, and it's really all coming through. I love what happens when you cook epazote. It gets very, very earthy. So from the steam, the iguana meat got very tender. It has a slight bit of game. It's a lot like chicken or rabbit, very lean and mild, but just like a tiny, tiny whisper of funk, nothing offensive. The dough itself, it does just feel a little bit dense. It's not very tender. It is a little bit dense. There's like a slight gumminess to it, but it's still really, really tasty. Like, it's just very flavorful masa, so you can't go that wrong. But yeah, if you didn't tell me it was iguana, I'd be like, whatever. Maybe even like a wild boar kind of flavor. You know what I mean? White meat, but like it's lived an exciting life. Okay, I definitely didn't get the ball right. I need to keep trying. But let's get into our guava. Let's see. Ooh, Oh, whoa. I can really smell the cinnamon. I like that. This feels very holiday already. Festive. Very holiday all around, you know? You're unwrapping it. It's like a little gift. If you have them all the same shape, you don't know what's inside. It's like a surprise. Yeah, it's peeling, but it's definitely, when you have a tamale made with lard, it just, the husk really easily comes off. And that's definitely not happening here. Some tamales, the husk is just like dripping in grease. I think that's a good sign. These are a bit dry. Let me give this guy a taste. The flavor of the guava itself feels really subtle. I think because we didn't have sugar in here, I'm getting mostly like cinnamon, not so much of the coriander, but it's mostly cinnamon, and it finishes with just like a little bit of heat in the back of your throat from the chipotle. The texture of the filling is actually really nice. It looks quite loose when we put it in there, but it kind of thickened up, and it's like really creamy and almost custardy. And with this like really mild taste, it almost feels like this could be like a dairy custardy kind of filling. I think it's really tasty, actually. I mean, obviously they're both really different. This is like your spicy entree tamale. This is your sweet creamy dessert tamale. I think the main thing that is different about this versus a modern tamale is just the texture of the masa itself. It's a little less tender, got a little bit of bounce, but I think because we started with tasty masa, it's still tasty. I think this just proves that all tamales are delicious. And I'm like, I mean, I think all we just need to do is top it with a little bit of sour cream, and we're gonna get through all of these. Yeah, I think they're still really tasty, and it was really fun to try and like make, you know, an ancient tamale. Interesting enough, apple pie is not as American as we thought. The first ever written recipe of apple pie comes to us from 1390 England, from a famous medieval cookbook called the Forme de Cury. But, hold on, wait. The first ever US cookbook, American Cookery, from 1796, actually has not one, but 2 apple pie recipes in it. So yeah, I guess apple pie is pretty American. So today we're gonna make not only the first ever written recipe for apple pie, but also the first American recipe for apple pie in a kind of culinary revolutionary war reenactment, right? But instead of Washington and Cornwallis, we're gonna have Granny Smiths and Golden Deliciousness, right? We're having fun here. Okay, so I'm gonna start by making the crusts because they need a little bit of time to chill and relax. First off is the crust for the American apple pie, which is actually pretty similar to how I would make a crust now. We're gonna cut some butter into the flour, mixy mix, and then bring it all together with an egg white. The egg white's kind of the unique thing for me. When I make an apple pie today, I usually just use cold water, so I'm interested to see how the egg white works. So here I've got a couple of egg whites, and I'm just gonna beat them with a fork. It's always a good idea whenever you're cooking with an egg white, get in there and mix it up. I'm not trying to, you know, get it frothy here, but it does take a minute to break up all the albumin, and it'll just make it easier to incorporate once we get it into the dough. See now how it's like easily pours? Because we broke up that albumin a bit. Okay, so now our butter. Chilled butter. I'm gonna slice it into thin pats and put it right into the flour. Really, the main difference here besides the egg white is I would normally put a little bit of salt and sugar in my pie crust. Oh, would you like me to cut this near you? We want to use cold butter because that's the key to getting a nice flaky crust. I do think it's interesting how this recipe's from 1796, but we're still making pie crust the same way. And that's like the coolest thing about these ancient recipes. A lot of stuff hasn't changed. For this recipe, we're using about 3/4 of the weight in flour and butter, which I think is a really good ratio. That's pretty much how I do my crusts now. So I have high hopes for this. I think this is going to be delicious. Nothing about this seems crazy so far. But yeah, I always put a little salt and sugar in my crust, not only for seasoning, but the sugar will help with the browning. But I'm interested, since we do have egg white in there, I think it's going to brown pretty well, just from the egg white. Okay, so little thin slices of our butter. And then I'm going to rub it into the flour with my fingers. Now, the key for flaky pie crust is always keep everything cold, and you gotta move pretty fast. Because once you get your hands in there, it's gonna wanna start melting. So I'm trying to move quickly here. Because we do have so much fat, though, that will always make sure that you will, even if you mess everything up and your butter gets really soft and overworked, there will be some level of tenderness because we have a good bit of butter. Now we're getting these nice little flakes, like corn flaky bits. I feel like a lot of recipes tell you to go for pea size, which I find kind of misleading. I think corn flaky bits is much better because you want nice flat bits so you get a flaky dough. Interesting thing, the only apple that was native to America before Europeans settled was the crab apple. And it was the first settlers in Jamestown who brought seedlings and cuttings to plant apples here. But also, once the first apples were grown in America, they were mostly used for cider. People actually preferred to have their apple in beverage form than as a snack. I mean, I do like cider, so I get it. Okay, nicely incorporated. You see, it doesn't have to be totally even, but we are ready to go with our egg white. So I'm gonna kind of go with a little bit of a well method here. So it just says 1 to 2 egg whites, so I'm gonna just eyeball it. When it comes to stuff like this, it really does depend so much on your brand of flour and just like how humid is it outside. So you kind of have to eyeball your hydration. I'm gonna just add enough egg white to bring it together into a shaggy mass. Now, normally I use my hand fork for things, but here I've activated the actual fork because I don't want to get this too warm. I want to make sure my butter stays nice and cold so we get nice flaky dough. And then I'm just going to knead this to bring it together and roll it out. And then we're going to let it chill. Okay. I feel like I got nice moisture. I'm just going to gently knead, and I want to do it relatively quickly because we don't want our butter to melt, right? Normally when I make a pie crust, I always like kind of laminate it, you know? Fold it over itself a few times just to get nice flaky layers. This recipe doesn't have us doing that, but I feel like it's gonna be nice and crisp and flaky just because of all that butter and that egg white. This dough came together really nicely. Okay, I'm gonna roll it out. Some people like to rest their dough before rolling it out. I just rest it after, because you gotta rest it after no matter what, right? Why rest it twice? I don't know. Makes sense to me. So we're gonna roll it out and then let it rest. Okay, bring it together. Now, personally, whenever I'm working with something like this, I like go ham with the flour because the last thing you want is to spend so much time, make a beautiful dough, and then have it stick to your board. So sad. If there's too much flour, you can always dust it off later. I'm gonna go for about 1/8 of an inch. If you get too thick with your crust, it's gonna be tough because a crust should not be that thick. I also find that rotating it after each roll will just ensure that you're not gonna have any stickage. All right, this is looking good. Hey, maybe I'll try egg whites in my pie doughs. A little bit thinner, I think. Boom. And let's do it. That feels good to me. Okay, so transferring your crust to your pan. A lot of people do this like roll it up on your rolling pin thing, but I just say be bold, move swiftly, have confidence. It'll be okay. Boom. We did it. See, we didn't have to get anything crazy. Now, I'm gonna make sure that it lies flat into the corners of the pan. And I'm gonna give it a little trim. Personally, I like about 1 inch of overhang so I get a nice crimp. Ooh, and we're doing this with a knife. Today I would just use scissors. Okay, I got my little overhang. Now see, I don't worry about it being too pretty because I want it to be nice and flaky, so move fast. Don't let your butter get warm. And I'm just gonna go for like a little really, really simple crimp. Alrighty, so this is gonna chill, and now I'm gonna make the English pie crust, which is totally different. Chill. So next, I'm gonna make the English apple pie crust, which is totally different. Couldn't be more different. So you know how the last apple pie was all about keeping it tendy, working fast, cold butter. This is the opposite. This is going to be a hot water crust. It's meant to be sturdy and it's gonna be freeform. So we've got AP flour and a little bit of bread flour because we want that gluten here. That gluten, baby. I'm gonna add some salt and I'm just gonna mix that up, make sure it's evenly incorporated, and then we're gonna add hot water and warm lard. Totally different vibe here. So this pie crust, this is gonna be really sturdy. We're gonna build it up and make it free form. And then the thing about this kind of dough is you have to work with it while it's warm. As soon as it cools down, it's very hard to mold. So we have to move pretty quickly. That's the one thing they both have in common. Move quickly. And this pie crust, I've only made a couple of times in my life. I am like a pro at the flaky stuff, but this will be entertaining for all of us, right? So in goes my lard. And then I'm gonna add some boiling hot water. And I'm gonna start by stirring it with a spoon just to distribute that heat a little before I get in with my hand. And we're gonna knead this until it is smooth. So through our research, there were actually a lot of recipes that said that Chaucer printed or wrote the first apple pie recipe, but that's actually not true at all. I know there's a little bit of an obsession over Chaucer and recreating aspects of his life, and he probably could have had an apple pie like this. It was around during that time. Okay, so now that everything's in there, after stirring it, it's like not super hot anymore, so I'm gonna knead it and get it nice and smooth, and then we can start forming. And we wanna make sure we form it while it's still a little bit warm. This dough also needs to chill a bit to get it really nice and stiff, so it doesn't like fall apart when we bake it, because it's not gonna be baked in a tin. Freeform. Actually, during this period, in the medieval time, they baked a lot of things in stuff called coffins. So it's like this hand-raised pie crust situation, and it wasn't always meant to be eaten. It's just what they served it in, these coffins. Okay. I think I'm gonna switch to a board knead. There is a lot of lard in here, so it's not gonna be like totally tough, but it's not gonna be flaky. Definitely not. And the crust here is going to be a little bit thicker than our American crust because it's holding up all by itself. It doesn't have support from a pie tin. Okay, I feel good about that. Now, we're going to make it into a ball and then a disc, and then we're going to form our pie. So I'm going to save about a third of this, and that's going to be our lid. This pie is going to be covered. The last one we kept uncovered. Let's see. Boom, boom. Does that feel like a third? Yeah. Okay, that's gonna hang out. That's my lid. Now, for this bit, let's start with a nice ball, and then we'll flatten it to a disc, and then we're gonna use these pie dollies to form the dough. Okay, I'm gonna form it right on the sheet tray, so I don't have to move it around after we form it. Now, these pie dollies are actually meant for individual pies, so you just form the dough right around here, and then you loosen it up. You can go wide and flat, high and tight, but we're gonna try and make a wide pie out of this. So I'm going for the last pie crust, I went for about 1/8 of an inch. Here, I'm going for more like 1/4. Whoops. It does release pretty easily because the dough is a little bit greasy from the lard. Okay, you're gonna go here, because I'm gonna spin the pan around. Make things easier for you, and sometimes that means you're gonna do things in a weird way. So I read online, if you don't have a pie dolly, you can also do this with a jam jar. You just need something with straight sides and a flat bottom. The dough is like super easy to work with, which I'm surprised. I thought it would be a little bit more difficult than it is. I feel like I'm good with my width, so now I'm gonna try and build these walls. Let's use you. And if they flop a little, that's cool, because I think I'm gonna be able to straighten it out once it's chilled. Hand-raised pie. There we go. I'm trying to make sure that I have a nice even thickness, and then I'll make my lid, which we'll put on top after we make our filling. When I had to make cakes as a pastry chef, sometimes they would have to just take the cake away from me, because it's one of those things that's never perfect. You can just keep doing it all day until someone's like, nah, you're done here. We're so close, guys. Not bad, not bad, you know? Let me make my top, and then we're gonna move on to the filling. So the top, I'm just gonna press it out to be a little bit wider than my crust, and then we will set this aside to chill as well. The reason why we have to do it now is that once the dough gets chilled, it's like really hard to work with. Just gonna go over with just to, you know, kind of flatten it out a little bit. And then I'm gonna let this chill. I'm not really even worried about it sticking because it is very much covered in lard. It's very greasy. So I think we're gonna be okay. All right, filling. I just fell a little bit. All right, the crusts are ready to go. They're gonna be chilling, so let's move on to the filling. Chilling and filling. All right, we had to activate tall Sohla because this recipe requires a lot of mashing, and I'm gonna need a little bit of height to get in there. So all of these things, they're just gonna get smashed together and then go into my hot water crust that I just made earlier. This is for our English apple pie. We researched different types of medieval apples that might still be around today, but honestly, there aren't that many. So they're really just used for research purposes. We decided to go instead with a mixed bag from the market, you know? Here go my apples. Now, in addition to apples, in here, I'm gonna add pears, figs, raisins. So it's very different from a modern apple pie. It's more of like a mixed fruit pie. And there's no sugar. There's no sugar in here because prior to colonization, sugar was really hard to come by and very expensive in England. So the sweetness is just coming from the fruit itself. So in here, apples, pears, figs, raisins. The recipe's a little bit vague and they just say spices. So we're going with the spices that were around in that time. So we got some cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger. I mean, that feels right. I would put that in a pie now. And now all we do is mash. So let's get in here. I feel like I want to take off my shoes and stomp in this. But we're gonna keep it sanitary. Oh, okay. Okay, we're gonna keep mashing this, pass it around the set, give everyone a good opportunity to get in a good smash. And then we're gonna come back and put it into our chilled pie crust. All right, so our two pie crusts are chilling. We finished up the filling for the English pie, and now we're gonna make the filling for our American pie, which it's actually gonna be cooked before it goes in the pie. So I think that's pretty interesting. So here I've got a whole bunch of apples, skin on, seeds on, and we're gonna stew this with just a bit of water until they get really nice and soft enough that we can mash it through a colander and get a really nice puree. It's gonna be more like an applesauce going into the crust than a traditional kind of pie that you think of today. So I just have enough water to help steam and soften the apple, and I'm assuming that most of this water is going to evaporate. It's just going to help it get going, and let's get them in here. Whoops, we lost one. Okay, so I'm going to cover this and let it stew until it's totally, completely softened. I'm gonna get in there every now and again, smush it around, and then we will come back once our apples are nice and tender. So the filling for this apple pie is gonna be cooked down until it's really nice and soft, a lot like an applesauce. That was more traditional for this time, unlike the sliced apples you see today. And also during this time, it was really common to have apple pie with a slice of cheese. Are we gonna have cheese? Do we have cheese? This kind of reminds me of the churn. Okay, so our apples have been cooking for a while now. They're super tender, very, very soft, and ready for passing through the colander. They're pretty much like it's already applesauce here. Very, very broken apart. And I'm just gonna pass it through here to get all the bits of skin, seed, stems, all of that. Now, normally when I make applesauce, I peel and core everything in advance. I wonder if there's an advantage to this. You know, like maybe the cooking it with the skins and the seeds will give it more flavor. But I'm excited to taste it and see, because I know that when you press grape must with the skins and the seeds, you get a very different flavor from when you make a grape juice and everything is removed in advance. So I feel like we're going to get some flavor action. Okay, so now I'm just going to do this, maybe just a couple scoops of apple at a time, and just press it through here so we get a really nice, soft, smooth puree. If I were doing this today, I would probably put it through a food mill. That's like this thing that's got a little crank. There's a screen at the bottom and it pushes things through. It's really great for making really smooth purees, potatoes, things like that. But this is how they did it in the olden days. Everything just took a little bit more time. So I feel like I've pressed out the majority of my apple pulp. I've just got the skins and seeds left behind here. And now I'm going to season it up with sugar, lemon zest, and rose water. And that's our filling for our American apple pie. I'm really interested to see how this bakes up, because it's just an applesauce and there's no eggs or anything binding it. I wonder if it's going to slice. I guess we'll find out. So, the recipe says that we're going to season it with sugar to taste. So I'm going to start with the lemon zest, a little bit of rose water, and let's see, I'm going to start with that much sugar. I don't want to get crazy. I don't know exactly how sweet this is going to be, because they have cooked down for so long and the juices have concentrated, so I imagine there's already a lot of natural sugar in there. The rose water and apple smells really good. That is a combo that I'm a big fan of. Okay, let's get in here. I think that's pretty sweet. I'm actually going to stop there. Cooking on the apples really concentrated the natural sugars. It didn't need a whole lot. Tastes really good at this stage. The rose water brings out all the natural aromas of the apple, and I do feel like I got more appliness because it cooked with the skins and the seeds, so I see the benefit of that. Okay, so now let me load up my American apple pie crust, and we're gonna have one pie ready to go. So here is my pie crust. It has chilled. It is ready to be filled. This pie crust has no top. In the cookbook American Cookery, the second recipe did have a top crust. So that one probably looks a little bit more like our modern apple pie. I am really interested to see how this bakes up, because the filling is really loose and soft, and it's pretty much just applesauce right now. So we got one ready to go. Should I move on to the second pie? So this is my crust for my English apple pie. I got my filling. I'm gonna load it up, put a lid on it, and this is also going to bake. Thomas Jefferson actually wrote about an apple that he said made unquestionably the best cider. It's the Tolliver apple. And unfortunately, it's been lost, but a lot of people think of it as like the holy grail of apples. They want to find it. Now, you know what I find really interesting? This is the English apple pie, but to me, it smells really familiar. It smells more like the classic American apple pie that I know, because of the cinnamon and the nutmeg. Okay, cool. Now, I'm going to put the lid on it and then poke a couple holes so there's some like steam vents. Boom. The dough, now that it's chilled, is super, super sturdy. I feel like it's like indestructible. Now, interesting thing, during the medieval times, they did have forks, but they didn't eat with them. They just used it for prep and for cooking, and they mostly would eat with their hands. So I'm probably going to eat this with my hand, you know, to keep in with the tradition of the time. Okay, our lid is on. That was actually easier than I thought. And I'm just gonna poke a couple of holes so it doesn't explode, you know? All right, so now that I have both of my apple pies filled, chilled, ready to go, they're gonna both bake, and then we're gonna taste. Okay, it is finally time. Our pies have baked. They've had a little bit of time to cool, and I'm gonna dig in. I'm going to start with the English pie first, you know, because it came around to us first. So let's get in there. I'm gonna eat this with my hands, because that's what they did. No forks, just digging right in. This is a very sturdy crust, nice and crisp. Crisp and crumbly, so... Ooh, okay. That held together really well. I wasn't expecting, I thought it might just all sploosh out, but definitely not. We got a nice, sturdy piece of pie. All right, let's get in there. I'm gonna just go in with my hands like they would have done back in the medieval times. I mean, it's really tasty. It doesn't taste that different from a pie from today. The crust, I was expecting it to be super hard and tough, but it's actually really crisp, and it's a lot like a cookie more than a flaky pie crust, but it's not tough. It's very tender, crisp, crumbly. The only thing I would want a little more sweetness. Remember, this one had no sugar. It's just sweetened from those dried figs and raisins. The spicing on here tastes super familiar. The texture is really nice. I actually think this is really tasty and definitely worth trying it again. Yeah, all right, let's try the American apple pie. This one, I'll plate it up with a little bit of cheddar, just like they would have done then. Okay, the filling here feels soft, but set. Kind of like a pumpkin pie vibe. The crust sounds really crumbly, flaky, crisp. Crisp all the way through, actually. I feel like we got a really nice color on that from the egg white. There was no egg wash here at all. So that beautiful browning is just because we put egg white in our dough. So I'm pretty excited to see how this is. Here, I shall use a fork. Here we go. Hey, that's really good for a first slice. You know what they say, the first slice is usually not good, but that's set up really nicely. The crust is nicely browned on the bottom, on the side. Okay, and I'm gonna get some sharp cheddar, because that's how they would have done it, with a little bit of cheese. So first I'll try the pie alone. I really like that there's a little bit of lemon. The rose is really nice, but ultimately the filling does just taste like applesauce in a crust, which, you know, I guess it's good if you like applesauce, but I like the texture of the filling in the English pie a little bit more. I'm gonna try it with the cheese now. A little cheddar. Mmm. I really like it. Once you have it with the cheese, the little salty sharpness goes really nice with the soft, sweet apples. I mean, overall, I think if you had either of these now, you wouldn't think that they were ancient. They just taste like really delicious apple pie. But we do have an apple pie from today that we got from the store. This is a modern apple pie. You can see it's got the sliced apples. It's got that really familiar, saucy looking vibe. I'm gonna try it a la mode, which is, I mean, the ultimate way to have an apple pie, right? So we got some vanilla ice cream, and then let's get in here. Little ice cream, little pie. It's a fantastic apple pie, but I have to say, I like the crust here more. The egg white makes it so crisp. Look at that. Look at how flaky and crisp that is. I didn't like laminate it or anything, but it's really impressive. I really like how that worked out. In comparison, the modern apple pie feels a little bit mealy. I actually think I learned a lot here. I'm definitely gonna start putting egg whites in my pie crust. I love how that came out. You don't need an egg wash, it's really crisp. These recipes were pretty cool. I learned a lot today, so I hope you guys did too.